I wanted to mention one thing. I'm familiar with this, something called the Arcata Marsh Project. Arcata is a university town just north of Eureka in Humboldt County on the bay. And they apparently process their municipal waste. And it goes down through the city, which is elevated above the bay so much. The water is processed and worked through the marshes to the ocean. And by the time it gets to the ocean, it's pure.
They say it's pure.
I
don't trust that government people.
Yeah.
But one of the problems is a lot of those municipal systems are built in parallel with drainage systems. So when it rains, it quite often will overwhelm sewage systems, and sewage systems will then discharge raw sewage waste into the rivers. This is essentially every municipality in the United States does this on the East Coast. Only very few newer municipalities on the West Coast don't do that. And that doesn't include LA. LA still runs their shit through their stormwater drains into the bay whenever it rains. But they also create mother's cookies, which is essentially their waste processing facilities will bake the crap that's left over down into these little biscuits that are called mother's cookies, which they sell off as fertilizer to be used on farms. So it's not something that we don't already do.
So the barrel has a cut open, so when you're going to store it to age it, then you obviously need to shut it. So
right, that's going to be in the instructions when you go to the OMIC website. So OMIC describes the process. So this is kind of like step one.
Sure.
And since there's so much interest, we're probably going to have a step 2 and a step 3 process, and that is the second and third barrel, which is typically 2 people will need 3 barrels. The one they're using, and they'll have 2 aging barrels, a newer aging barrel and an older aging barrel. And what they do is they simply take your toilet seat off, transfer it to the one you need the toilet seat on, and then cover it with a screen. So it's basically a screen cover that's basically secured with a device to keep the screen from being pulled off. They've had instances of critters getting in, so they've developed a better screening device. But it'll basically...
It needs a cover from the weather if it's outside. You can just leave it outside.
Right, essentially... it should be left open, I think. They just use a screen, and the idea is it doesn't rain often enough in the desert to saturate your barrel, except for maybe every once in a while. It does get torrential, but...
Wouldn't it dry out too much?
What's that?
It would dry out too much, though.
That's the other problem is, you could dry out your barrel so much that you're no longer...
Right. That's what happens in my compost, yeah.
So this system was developed in Tucson, and it's developed specifically for the desert because you can't use these systems in areas where it doesn't dry out, because then there's too much moisture in the barrel and it won't work itself back up, which is the whole reasoning for the ventilation system, is the passive removal of the excess moisture, because that's the most, that makes up the most of the volume essentially when you're doing your business. Someone was describing to me earlier how they were able to essentially, it takes a long time to fill a barrel, but as you're filling it, it's going to be compacting and aging and drying out. So there is this process where when you switch to a new barrel, not only does it take a long time to fill that up, but your old barrel, which might have been full, will have reduced down to about 25% of its volume. And so without even dumping out your barrel, you can almost continuously just go from barrel to barrel to barrel to barrel until they fill up. And that could be years, and that simply depends on the weather and those type of things.
And so I'll probably end up doing that bucket to barrel thing. So some of the people that do that, like, is that really a heinous thing, transferring the bucket into the barrel? Or?
I do bucket to deep hole.
And
then shade tree planted above. So the 5-gallon bucket ends up about 2.5, 3 feet down. Soil compacted on it, and then vermicompost soil that I make, and then a non-food producing tree. And that's been working really well. Is there any drawback to that?
Well, you were thinking more about the weight of it?
Not just the weight, just the the smell, the whatever, just the process.
Compostable bags.
your rib
Oh,
area.
put
Close
them
it.
inside and close.
Close it,
Oh,
and then you
okay.
But I haven't, ours
That's-
break down.
As long as the company I use don't. I was
No.
surprised. I was worried about that, but
Just the ones we had.
I have to actually help stop breaking down.
And the reason for the bag is just so that your bucket isn't all nasty.
Yeah,
But I
right,
try not to buy anything, like import things and buy more plastic bags.
right.
Even this system, like, if you're cutting all that stuff in your garden, you're not organic gardening anymore. Because you just put a whole bunch of plastic in the garden. That's like all of
do
our
have to be
building
careful.
materials.
So I learned the most about the bucket to barrel method from people in RVs, and most people in RVs use the bucket to trash method. But the general rule of thumb is if you're providing enough organic material in the burying process, and you start enough organic material in the bottom, then it doesn't ever get to the sides to stick, and so they're able to just dump out their barrels and easily wash it out because you don't have caked on feces essentially ever reaching the side of your bucket or barrel. And so I haven't heard any complaints about that or being able to clean out the barrel or being disgusted by it. Essentially, if you start getting smells or too much moisture in there, you should probably just increase the amount of organic material you're putting on. And if the barrel's getting too heavy or becomes too hard to handle, simply increase the frequency that you're dumping.
Tell them about the fly trap.
Oh yeah, so you did see the fly trap is nothing more than the top of a bottle inserted into a jar. It's the light of the jar that will attract the bugs up into the jar and then you can discard them, but it's a way to remove those pests so that they're not essentially fouling your compost.
They don't fly back in the bottle top?
It's such a small hole, it's harder for them to fly back down.
Yeah,
They fly to the light, so it's dark.
That's cool.
So they die in there then?
They die in.
yeah,
You can just drop them back into the...
exactly.
Compost.
Compost them. So one of the things that I use is, like, if you get a lot of flies, then you probably need to look to see how they're getting in, because if you're properly sealing the toilet seat with your foaming material, there shouldn't be any interaction or places for pests to get in. The whole design of screening the top of these things, and you can see he used another hose clamp and cut out a piece of screen in order to affix to those. You're also going to be putting a line of foam around the top of the barrel so that when you lay the board on, there's no places for critters to crawl underneath the top edge, which is the reason why they use the springs to hold the lid on, because you just get a little bit of variance in the foam as you're sitting on it or not sitting on it, so it allows the barrel to make that adjustment.